Don't look. All right, we're in the middle of an optional end of class unit that hopefully will be very useful to people. The goal of all of this is to spark discussion. So if you have questions as I'm going over anything, if you'd like to talk about an experience that you have, or this makes you think of a what if scenario, please do raise your hand and ask. This is not supposed to be a presentation as much as a discussion. So we're going into, we talked a little bit about preparing for and what an offer, I guess we haven't really talked about that quite yet, but what the process looks like a little bit. But if you land a position, it's very important to negotiate. There are certain aspects that any position is willing to negotiate and certain aspects that they will not be, but that should be a dialogue that you open with them. One thing to note, it is required legally in Washington State for companies to post at the very least a salary range, if not a specific salary in their job posting, and that will give you a baseline. Assume that the company is trying to get you to accept an offer at the lower end of that, and that they are willing to do something in the higher end of that. If you are coming in with less skill, this could also represent the range of skill of someone who could be hired for that position. Someone who has less experience would make them a lower end, someone who has more experience would make them a higher end. Because they've budgeted that for that position, that is room for negotiation. There is certainly wiggle room. Do not let them walk all over you and say, you don't have the level of experience needed for the upper range of this salary. We're going to start you at the very low end of this. At that point, I would start to say, well, I do have relevant experience. And start to make some credible threats. Don't get aggressive with them. You don't want to be rude by any means, but you can start to say something like, I have other options. Even if you don't, it's worth at least throwing it out there that they don't have all of the power in this negotiation, that this is a negotiation between two interested parties who would like to come to a consensus. Of course, the level at which you can negotiate will depend on the number of offers that you have. So getting multiple offers within the same offer window is incredibly useful for that negotiation. That's something that I have always had the ability to do within my own academic pursuits, and the difference is incredible. You can get them to budge a significant amount if they're scared of losing you, or if in academia, it's difficult to fail a search for a number of reasons, but out in industry, you get that same. I should probably tell the story, my wife's story here, because that really says a lot. So when we were moving to Spokane, I had accepted this position and she had two offers on the table. One from a local power company that I will not name I don't know why I would want to do this, but to protect their reputation. I don't actually want to protect their reputation, but I will for the sake of the fact that this is being recorded. And another at a Canadian mining company. She is in accounting, by the way, so she does tax. And between these two, one offer was higher, one offer was a little bit lower, but within a range that could meet the other one. And it felt like at the power company, the job would be a little bit easier. So there was room for negotiation. And in fact, they had said that they were willing to negotiate. And the issue that cropped up was basically that they didn't end up willing to negotiate, and they didn't like the personality characteristics of someone who would negotiate. So you run the risk whenever you do try to negotiate that you burn a bridge at the company and they revoke the offer, which is exactly what happened at this company. They actually called us up and said, your personality is not a fit with our company, we're revoking our offer. Which was probably for the best, because if they're not willing to take your word and work with you, what is it going to be like to work for them? Thinking about the day-to-day, you are not so desperate for a job that you will be mistreated because of this. And it came out that this company was run by a bunch of people who, for whom that seems to be to align with their natural leanings, which was they, at least it came across like this, that they expected the woman to just listen to what she was told and do what she was told and not say anything back. Why would you want to work for that? That just doesn't seem like they're living in the 2020s. So much happier now, making higher wage with a boss who respects her, but that is only because there were multiple options at the time and you're not willing to get into a situation where you'll be mistreated or not respected. However, negotiation is expected. Is from an employer's perspective, they expect their employees or prospective employees to negotiate. If they're not doing that, it's kind of shocking that someone would just accept an offer. That said, in today's day and age and the current computer science market, there may be so many options that you may not have a bunch of negotiation leverage. That it's worth figuring out as early as possible in that process so that you don't dig yourself a hole you can't dig yourself out of.
So can you explain something, just a little
Yeah.
backstory?
Yeah.
So I have a friend, you know, like in marketing,
Mhm.
right? And they had this coworker, and he worked at the company for a really long time. And he was getting like a really low salary. Like he should be getting like a higher salary with
Yeah.
his skill sets and
Yeah.
everything. And then you get new hires and they're getting way more than this poor guy.
Yeah,
that's
we
been
call that
working.
salary inversion.
Yeah, so can you explain a little bit why that happens? Why would they give like new people coming in more money than someone that's been working at their company and spending valuable time and effort to
Yeah.
you know, do good and actually.
It comes down to psychology. From a business's perspective, they're trying to cut as many costs as they can. If you're hiring in the current market, you have to pay the current market rate for someone and to choose your company when they have other options. For someone who's already working there, they have that job in place. They have to go through an entire job search to find something that is better. That may change their commute. That may change where they want to live. That may change their daily routine, their family routine. It's a big disruption in someone's life to have to look for another job and adapt to a new job. Knowing this, companies can fail to, or if there's some kind of agreement of a typical cost of living increase that you get every year, the market rate may be going up faster than that. But historically, it hasn't. So when you're looking at things like a massive inflation over COVID, or a massive inflation because of the current administration's policies that is coming on us here in the next year or so, we can look at this as if you're used to only getting 2 to 3% cost of living increases on a yearly basis, from a company's perspective, they may not have budgeted for your role to be paid at this level, or when they're making the budget for a new hire, they're assuming that this person is going to continue to be paid what they're being paid, even if it's fairly comparable. So that's something that I've also seen in academic environments where salary inversion is a thing.
Well, like, the coworker manager had a really fight for the thing that he deserved. Right?
Yeah.
It took a while. I'm like, he was telling
Yeah.
the story and I'm like, what? That's insane.
Yeah, if you find yourself in this situation, there are a couple things you can do about it. The first would be to talk to your manager or any other higher ups to say, I noticed that there's some salary inversion going on in the company. And yes, it can be frowned upon to talk about salary in a workplace environment, but that's really only to reduce wages. In my opinion, salary should be something that is publicly available and or is something that you should be willing to talk about. Obviously, that's a decision that you can make individually as to whether you're comfortable talking about salaries or not. But the more information you have, the more you can argue for workers' rights, your coworkers' rights with regards to equal pay for equal work. So I do think that's very important to be able to do. If your company is not willing to do that, culturally, it is very acceptable, especially in computer science, to job hop every 2 to 3 years. Even if you're not intending to leave this company, you're reasonably happy. it's worth at least looking around at what are my options. Throw a few job applications out there. This does not have to be the level of applications that you would do when you don't have a job and are looking for a job, but when an opportunity that's an obvious upgrade to your current situation comes across, apply for it. And if you get it, great. If not, you have a job to fall back on, so you're not in any kind of time crunch or rush to do something.
So in a job offer, but you like your current position, but you take that offer to your higher ups and say, hey, I have this offer on the table, but I really like this company, I'd like to stay. Can
we work on something? Can we work something out?
This is my market value.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to leave. I can't, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So it becomes negotiation leverage regardless, and only if the company is unwilling or unable to match that, then you know. But even taking something that's a higher pay and negotiating a slight increase at your current company, maybe that changes your mind and you want to stay, but then you get a pay increase for doing the same work for the same company because you were willing to put yourself out there and try to determine your market value by looking around. Yeah, I think that's very important, especially in technology, because technology is changing all the time. The value of positions are changing all the time. And I don't know, the value of a particular job may be going up. It's significantly more than the cost of living raises or the typical promotion schedule that you might be on at a company. But when you're taking that position, make sure to negotiate. Once you have that position, continue to look for opportunities and use those as an ability to go back and negotiate. And you may find that you leave the company because of that and go to a better situation for you. You may find that it leads to a better salary. Only go once you have that offer on the table, though. If you're applying to something and you're in the interview process, do not go for it yet, because you may burn some bridges at your current company. And then if you don't end up with that position, you don't want to be left without a job in the middle of it. So only once you have that offer on the table. So yes, having multiple offers bid against each other is great. Once you're that deep into the process, it's a lot of work to find the next best candidate or to negotiate through with the next best candidate. So people will not want to lose you once they're at the position where an offer is on the table. So negotiating, if it's just a little bit more from their perspective to not have to go through all of that work, then that can very frequently be worth it. And note that salary is not the only aspect that you can negotiate. You can negotiate benefits, depending on the company. You can negotiate other compensation. So stock-based compensation, retirement plan compensation. There are lots of different aspects of compensation that you should be aware of and that you should be looking at as potential. Yeah.
The job market's going to change in the next half a decade or so.
It will certainly change. The question is, how will it change? In my best estimation, there's going to be positions opening up for prompt engineers, as well as for AI verifiers. So someone will come up, an AI will come up with a potential solution, and we will need someone to analyze that solution to say, is this efficient enough? Does this do exactly what the client needs? But the next language that gets invented, I'm guessing, is going to be less of a programming language and more of a prompting language of how do we effectively communicate and get what we want from AI systems. So that is something that I would be aware of and looking into as you go through the education, because you know the CS concepts. You may not have to write all of those concepts from scratch in industry or just import and use libraries to do that and construct something yourself. You may find that the industry starts moving toward at least having a draft of aspects of a code coming from an LLM and being able to verify that that is what is needed. I do not know. I wish I could see into the future. But I do think that computer science as a theoretical field is falling off the map a little bit. And being able to interface with technology as it evolves is incredibly important from your shoes. And adaptability is important, and understanding the why behind things is important, because that's never going to go away. That does not mean that you don't have to know exactly how each of these systems works throughout this education. That still will be required, but the actual way that you're going to be applying that may be changing over the next 5 years. It's a really weird time to be a student. You're not just learning something to go apply it. You're learning something so that you have the basis for whatever the world looks like in 5 years. So to give you a sense of, in a professor's shoes, what does that negotiation look like? I first attempted to negotiate salary. Salary was a non-starter. Basically, there was a certain budget for this position, they couldn't go $1 over it. But that didn't mean that I couldn't ask for more money for research funding. So my startup funding got increased because of that. And I also know I negotiated for an extra year before I go up for tenure. So I'm going up in 5 years instead of 6. So I moved my promotion timeline forward by a year because of my prior experience. Another professor I know got a course release that basically said, instead of teaching 6 courses per year, you only have to teach 5 for the first year. So 1 fewer course to teach while you're figuring out the system. This was their first time ever in a teaching position. So that makes a lot of sense. You take some of the burden off, you can do a lot more planning, a lot more. So you can use that as an argument for why less work, more compensation. Anything that the company could offer is room for negotiation or potential room for negotiation. They may just say no, that's a non-starter. Don't just say that's not good enough and put it back on them. Try to have a specific ask. This is a common tactic in business as well. They don't want to give you their maximum offer right away, but they will say, what are you looking for? And trying to play and figure out how they can lowball you based on your discussing what you want. So that means don't just give them what you want, give them more than you want so that you settle and negotiate on what you want. Because they will try to drive you down no matter what you say. If there is a salary range, start right at the high end of that and try to justify why you think you are worth the high end of that salary range. Don't go above that salary range. That's disrespectful to the range that they posted. They posted that range for a reason. But you may end up settling in the middle of that range, even though their initial offer was right at the low end of that range. And that would be very useful to you because you're probably not the perfect candidate for the position deserving of that very high end salary. But if you can get something in the middle of that range rather than something at the low end, that's a big difference, usually. And as mentioned, think beyond salary. There are other benefits. One-time benefits, you can ask about moving benefits, signing bonuses. A lot of companies will give you a flat one-time signing bonus, and if they can't pay you more year to year, then you can ask for a large signing bonus. If you get a large signing bonus and then leave the company after a year or two because another better offer comes along for a better salary because their salary is lower and non-negotiable, then you can do that, eat the signing bonus and move on after a year or two. You are not tied to that company. And that one-time benefit could be, if you leave after a year, like you negotiated for that much of a higher salary. So are they more flexible in other benefit types? Stock options, especially in up-and-coming tech companies, is quite valuable and can increase in value over time. And of course, negotiate how you want. If they're trying to force you to make a decision here and now, force them to make you take the time and start to do that negotiation via email instead of over the phone or over Zoom. If you say, I would prefer to do this negotiation via email, whenever they come to you with any information, you can do research, you can look into it. You can ask around to friends or family or past professors for advice on what to do in that particular situation so that you're not put on the spot and pressured to accept a lower salary than you would like. I started this too late. That's funny. I had looked at this and that was the very last thing we were going to go over. So that's good to know, but that's not what we were supposed to talk about right away. I think we were here. So that's all good to know once you land a position, but that was the very last thing I was planning to talk about, so oops. We were in the middle of this slide last time, if I actually recall from actual memory. So we were in the middle of going over the actual interview process and talking about what happens in the coding portion of an interview. And one of those things was if the interviewer is going to try to help you to solve a problem, you should, of course, let them do that. So you're not going to be scored on exactly how well you did. You're more likely to be judged on I call it here a gut feeling, but really what was your problem solving process like? There's a lot of behavioral components. Did you ask questions? Did you clarify? What did you do with the information that was presented to you? Did you have a logical approach given the information that you were presented? How did you use that to tackle the problem? So it's not right or wrong. It's not how close did you get in the problem. There are many facets to analyzing how well an employee does on a prospective employee. So they're looking at things like your analytical skills, like, yes, your coding skills, but also your technical knowledge, your fundamentals. Did you select the right data structure? Were you using an adequate algorithm that would solve the problem if you had more time or if you weren't so flustered? And then, of course, they'll also talk to you about your experience, what have you worked on in the past, and a significant amount of culture fit and communication skills. A company will be looking for a particular culture fit. At this company my wife applied for, they were looking for someone to fall in line and not ask questions. It was very much not who my wife is. So that was not a good culture fit. On the other hand, my culture fit here is much better. I get to prioritize students. I get to be in an institution that is at least attempting to prioritize students. You can argue how well they're doing that or not, but I feel like in general, the institution has students' best interests in mind. Even if sometimes I don't agree with those decisions, and at least as a culture fit, we want the same thing. Questions on any of that? Going into an interview like this, you should certainly know about data structures and algorithms. Did we talk about this? I think we got partway through this as well. Yeah, we did go through this. So I apologize for going over stuff we already went over. I have a memory of a goldfish in case I haven't said that 10 times yet this quarter. We talked about company's business model. We talked about all of this. We get this far? I forget if we got this far. No. Did we see this slide at all? No? All right, I'm just making things up. So interview questions are selected on the basis of what's important to the company, what they're looking for. So this can even vary within the same company. There's no oversight that the company has to ask particular questions. There will be some oversight about make sure that you target this skill or that skill. But in general, interviewers are mostly left to their own devices to figure out how good of a fit you are. So if you're just looking at past interview questions from prior applicants, that's not going to be enough. There's still information there and you may find similar kinds of questions, but you also may not. So that is not enough preparation by itself. You certainly want to look at the company's business model as the start of applying to them because that is something you would be interfacing with and is something that's important to them. So if you're working for any kind of large company, expect something that is scalability related. Even though you can write a single Java class for an application for a class, that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to write code for a company that services millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of potential customers. So expect there to be some kind of scalability based question in a large company based model. The more you know your company, the more you can know what to expect. From their perspective, if you put yourself in their shoes, what questions would you write to determine whether an applicant is qualified or not? Or is a good fit with that company? They're going to target what's important to the company. It's also important to research your role within that company so that you can figure out the kinds of questions you might be asked about that kind of role, as well as the kinds of questions that you should ask them. We'll get to that in a little bit, but that's a very important topic to cover. Is asking questions in an interview is not optional. They will say it is optional, but you can really set yourself apart with the kinds of questions that you ask in an interview setting. The other really important part is if you haven't heard back within a week, then you should check back in. Sometimes they can give you an update on a timeline. Sometimes they can give you an update on, we're filling the position right now, but you can reapply in 3 months. We thought your application was strong. So make sure that just because you've been rejected from one company, that's not the end of the road for that company. Ask when you can reapply. And then circle back to them and submit an application, especially if they use some resource that allows you to save that application for later. You can just resubmit that application with a few clicks, and it's a lot less work than making a new application for a new company. Maybe the CEO has a child, and that child has, it's an important internal hire for the CEO, and no matter how qualified you are going to take that away from the CEO's child. But the CEO is not popping out kids frequently enough to take over a new role every 3 months. So maybe you're going to have more success in 3 months. And maybe you were the top candidate, top external candidate for that position. I know plenty of people who have been rejected on the first try and have gotten the position on the second try, or a similar position within the same company. Especially if you get as far as an interview process, you start to become a known quantity in that company. People will recognize you. They'll know that this is a reasonable hire. And there's value in that. So best practice, if they don't say anything or aren't willing to give you any information on this, is to wait 6 months to a year to reapply at the same company. But some companies allow you to reapply within 3 months or even 1 month. So it's worth asking the recruiter if there's a company policy on that. All right, what do we do before the interview? We'll talk about this in general, and then we'll dive into an actual timeline of what you should be thinking about and focusing on preparing for that. So 1, perfect your resume. We do have a career center here in the Catalyst building. They are great at general resumes, and they falter a little bit when it comes to anything that is CS specific. So they're not going to know much about the exact buzzwords or how to talk about how much experience you have in a particular programming language or the particular application or skill set. I can help with this a bit to a limited extent, depending on my own availability, but I'm known to meet with people from time to time. Talk to the Career Center first, do the best that you can with them, and then I can help you with the CS specific aspects of a resume. I like to do things like organize where your skills and your experience are right next to each other. That is incredibly useful from my perspective. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but the easiest way to check how good your resume is to forget everything you know about yourself. Print out a copy of your resume or just look away from the computer, flush your mind of any information, and then look at your resume. Give yourself about 5 seconds. What do you learn about yourself? And then just look away. What popped out at you? What do you know? Is that enough information to make an informed decision? How well does that represent you? What is important about you should become apparent in those first 5 to 10 seconds. So because of this, I like to put skills vertically because it's very easy to read from top to bottom and less easy to read from left to right. That capital letter at the start of each one, if you're looking for a particular skill, pops out if it's in a column-based form. Then you put the experience right next to it. And then if anyone is thinking, well, what have they done to get that skill or with that skill? The experience for that skill is right next to it. If you have 10 seconds, you look for a particular skill, you see it, you see what they've done, you put that resume in a maybe pile. A lot of the times an AI is looking at that resume and doing a first pass. So you want to avoid any actual table structures in your resume. You want to make sure that if you do that, it's actually columned and not in a complicated structure, because algorithms will have a hard time parsing any structures that you put in your resume, but it will not struggle with things like regular columns. If you're looking at electives or courses that you may or may not want to take as part of your degree, focus on those that have projects. What are the actual outcomes from a class? Not just what fits the best with your schedule or allows you to sleep in the most, or is the least work. Think about what is going to look the best when I graduate. What am I going to be able to show off from this class? So from this class, I'm hoping that you can show off your linked list sort large project that we've been building from the very beginning, because it is quite impressive for a 10-week course to put together something like that. But instead of having 7 or 8 different projects that you worked on in one class, you have one project that you can show off. Be able to describe things like why you implemented things the way that you did. The fact that it contains a design pattern. You should be able to know that we implemented the strategy design pattern and that that's what's used, be able to describe what's happening at an object-oriented perspective as you put this together. That will look much more impressive than if you can't do that, or if you had a bunch of smaller self-contained projects. So this is what you showcase. Interviewers like to see what have you done. So select courses that will give you more ammunition. The more you have from your classes, the less you will have to do on your own to be able to stand out. Of course, you're going to get absolutely everything you need, especially for very particular positions. So also be working on your own projects on the side. Basically, college is the time to do this. If you have spare time, work on something to build your skills. Work on something to boost something on your resume so that it will be that much more impressive. Of course, you need to prioritize your own health, especially your mental health. Stay sane as you do things, but just beware that by the time you graduate, you need to be at a place where you can interface with industry at some way, shape, or form.
Could you talk a little bit more about like what's good with projects?
Yeah, so there are open source repositories over the internet of projects that are being crowdsourced to do something. If you contribute code to an open source project, you can add yourself as a collaborator to that project. If you do that, then you can throw that on your resume as I did this for this open source project. So if you just look around for open source coding projects, open source software development projects, then there's some free software out there that is being worked on by some community. You can join Discords for this. There are plenty of opportunities to network through this as well. And there you can make actual connections with people at real companies through doing this, especially if your work is noticed. If you provide good code or a significant amount of code to a project, that is some person at a company's dream to produce that, you become known. You apply to that company and suddenly you're not just a resume on the staff. You're someone who has already done the equivalent of a coding interview style question or problem, and they know part of what you can do. So that is one option. You can also just do your own passion projects. As you learn more about computer science, you'll be able to build more and different tools that can help you in your daily life. You can think about, how could my life be improved? What could I write for myself that would be a tool for that? Especially, and we'll talk about this later as well, when an interview question comes up like, what are your weaknesses? You can now describe a weakness that you've been covering with some application that you wrote to help you manage that weakness. And now it shows that not only are you showing real weaknesses and not fake weaknesses like, I work too hard, I'm too agreeable, things that no one actually wants to hear that aren't weaknesses, but it shows that you are actively aware of your weaknesses and you're working to get control of them in a better state by using the tools and knowledge that you have to construct something. And that comes across very well. We all have weaknesses, but not all of us are willing to admit them, work on them, and use our knowledge and skill sets to improve at our weaknesses. Other follow-up questions on kinds of projects you can do? Yeah.
I think the project site is the most important thing because we're all going to the same group, so if we don't do anything on the side. And we all just take a different classes, then they're all the. Job we're applying for, they're gonna be the exact same thing, so you have to stand out.
Potentially. Here we do have different professors who teach different classes in different ways. If you did not take this course from me, you would not have the project that we built this quarter. I redesigned this course from the ground up for that purpose. And also because I gutted design patterns as a course, so I'm trying to get people those same outcomes sprinkled across the different classes that I teach. Without having a course that's just focused on them. So this is true for everyone else who is in exactly the same set of courses that will look like some of those projects will become known. But I'm hoping that this degree becomes something like there's an applicant from Eastern, there's an applicant from some other school. All else being equal, we're going to choose the applicant from Eastern because of the curriculum that they can show. They were successful at these difficult projects. We've had success in our history hiring people who have been through that same kind of curriculum. So even if you show them the same kinds of projects, that may still give you a leg up. You're also not implementing them the same way. Unless you're all collaborating behind my back and copying and pasting each other's code, and my grader is taking the Men in Black memory wiper between each grading opportunity, then you're gonna have some differences or some reason why you did the way you did. Even if it's the same project, an interviewer sits down with you and says, let's talk about this project. How did you come up with this? Why did you solve this the way that you did? You will all have different responses to your own approach to those projects. And that's what's important anyway. Part of it is what have you done, but a lot of it is how did you do it? What do you take away from it? So there is still value in it, but I do agree that you should be doing something on the side as well, in case they say, well, what have you done that other people who are applying for this position have not done? Yeah,
This quarter as a project,
yes.
how would you like write that out? Do that on this?
I would, so you want it to be on GitHub, basically, and you would, in any projects, as part of the header of a resume, you're going to have your name, your phone number, and part of that is going to be your GitHub repository. And that way, when you talk about significant projects that you've done, you can even do something like add a star after that, if that project is on the GitHub repository. And now, if that project piques the interest of someone who is either recruiter or is responsible for the hiring of this position, they will go to your GitHub repository and look at your code or look at your project. I've had success with some students who go into interviews and their repositories get starred, which means that they're saved by the recruiters or by the people who are doing the hiring, because it's an interesting enough project that they think they can learn something from it. I did this with a reinforcement learning project. I had a student graduating who went into a research position at Johns Hopkins. And the people he's now working with at Johns Hopkins starred his repository, because all he did was make there was almost no graphical component to this, was to make a reinforcement learning agent to intelligently play a randomly generated Fire Emblem level. That's it. That's all it was. But underneath the hood, there was a lot of learning and complexity to that used state-of-the-art reinforcement learning techniques. And in that interview, he was able to describe everything from that project, why he did what he did for that, and it matched exactly what they were looking for in a reinforcement learning based researcher. So they hired him right out of undergrad into a 6-figure salary, which great. That's exactly what people want to be looking for out of college. But that only became an option because he recognized, I want to do this. There's this fun passion project I want to do. I can't get what I want from it from school, but I can get course credit for it by doing a directed study with professors who know what they're doing with regards to this field, so that I can back and forth make this project over the course of a semester. So that is also an opportunity for you if you don't like the courses that are being offered, or you don't see the relevance in what you want to do. Get to know the professors in the department and start talking to them about what you are interested in doing, and then ask, what can you offer? Or what could we come up with a directed study that gets me some of these outcomes or some familiarity with this technology or with this concept? So that I can show off a project that's not the same as everyone else's project. I have a master's student working with me next quarter on a reinforcement learning project. And that's going to be really cool as well. I do lots of stuff outside of reinforcement learning as well. I do lots of games, game-based analysis. There's lots that we could do working together, and I'm just one professor of the many in the department. So there are lots of opportunities. So be aware that you can do that. And that can get you what you need. Yeah,
We would kind of consider doing to build a list from scratch and then creating sort methods. Is that how you?
yeah, I would say we made a bunch of different linked list types and we made sure to put them in an inheritance hierarchy. We had an interface for that. Then we used the strategy design pattern to compose a linked list with a particular sort type at runtime. And that sort type was also an inheritance hierarchy. So to use the strategy design pattern, you're taking one inheritance hierarchy and composing it with another inheritance hierarchy. So that is how I would describe that. And you were using the strategy design pattern to do that. One thing you'll want to do for this class or any other class project or project that you make is make sure you go back and document it. Even if you got full credit for documentation, think about when you apply for a position, what are the documentation standards that company is looking for? If you can document your code in a way that matches what they are looking for, or just to show that my code is documented very well, you should have what looks like production level code when you go apply. Have I required that precisely in this class? Not exactly. But it's something that you can go back and look at when you're ready to apply or make the change each summer to projects that you've worked on this year. It's just to go back and say, how clear is this from someone's perspective who is not in this class? You can assume they have a little bit of a CS background, but maybe they don't have perfect Java readability or writability. Then they could just read your documentation. They should be able to understand from your documentation alone what every method is doing, what every class is doing, how to use your code from just your documentation. More on the resume. I've talked mostly about this, so we'll probably speed through it a bit. So recruiters spend a fixed amount of time. I like to say assume 5 seconds because it should pop out in 5 seconds, but you can also give yourself 10 seconds and figure out what can I glean about myself just from my resume in 10 seconds. So formatting is vital. Most important information should pop visually. That's very difficult for a lot of logical computer scientists. Is to think about from a recruiter's perspective, where is the important information? How does it look? Is it surrounded by a bunch of other less important information, or does it stand out in some capacity? Make sure to keep it to 1 page. I know it is tempting to go over 1 page, but in CS and in the modern era, 1 page. If you have more information, drop the least relevant information or the most outdated information. It doesn't need to be a CV. It doesn't need to be everything you've ever done. Employment history should be the most relevant and recent. You can customize this to the position you are applying for. You should not have one general resume that you send everywhere. Look at the position's requirements and customize what you put on your 1-page resume based on the position you are applying for. You'll be much more likely to get an interview. Accomplishments should be written like accomplished X by implementing Y, which led to Z. The reason you do this is you're leading with the accomplishment. That is the most important piece of information. If someone is reading your resume very quickly, you don't need, the less important information is how you did it and what happened as a result of it. The most important thing is, what did you do? So make sure that's true for accomplishments, but in any other part of the resume, put the most important information right at the start of the sentence or bullet. Keep the projects to the 2 to 4 most significant or most relevant to the position. You'll want the description, the language you wrote it in, the technology that you used. More than that, is found in your GitHub. If they are interested in what you have done beyond those 2 to 4 most significant projects, they will be diving through your GitHub to figure that out, and that's okay. It's really a flyer or an advertisement for yourself. It's not comprehensive. So independent projects are preferred to course projects. It shows that you're willing to go do things when you aren't forced to, that you have a natural level of curiosity and interest in the field. So if you think that 2 projects are about equally impressive and relevant, choose the one that you did yourself over the one that you did in class. But if it's more impressive or more relevant for what you did in class, put that. You also want to list your language and software proficiencies, but you also want a proficiency level associated with it, not a number of years of experience. Because if I did Advent of Code this year, which happened only in December, maybe I only did the first 3 of those, but I tried out a new language. I did it in Swift for the first 3 days. And I said, I have 1 year of experience in Swift because a year ago, or most of a year ago, I programmed 3 basic things in Swift. That is not comparable to someone whose full-time job for 1 year was writing and reading Swift every day. So a number of years, very ambiguous. If you have a relevant relative proficiency level, then that is very useful. I would not say that you are moderate proficiency when you graduate with something. If the most language proficiency that you have somewhere is moderate, you aren't going to get interviews. So make sure that you say at least 1 language you are fluent in. So even at this point, I would say you are fluent in Java. I would at least advertise that. Make them prod and poke as to what don't you know about Java. If you've been working nonstop in that language by the time you graduate and you feel like you can do complex manipulations within the language, then I would say you are an expert. But fluent just means you can read it and you can write basic algorithms and data structures in it. You should be at that point with multiple languages by the time you graduate. Questions on that? Yeah.
So I mean, expert kind of language, just when you feel like you can do anything you want.
It would be if you can, if I were to give you some problem, if you could come up with the optimal solution right off the top of your head with language specific features, then I would say you are an expert. So what does Java do that C++ doesn't do? What could I do in Java that I couldn't do in C++, or that I could do easier in Java? Then I would call myself a Java expert. Can you do bit manipulations because you understand how everything is stored underneath the hood? Can you, things like that, do you know the syntax to do complicated things underneath the hood? But do not apply for CS positions without multiple fluent on something. It doesn't have to be a language, it can also be a software proficiency, but there should be multiple fluents throughout that list. Even if you personally don't feel like that you have a lot to learn, that's okay. You can be fluent in something and have a lot to learn. I would consider a lot of the people who submit essays for me in game dev, for instance, are fluent in English, even though I read their essays and it doesn't seem like they're fluent in English. There are things you don't know or mistakes that you make, and that's okay. You're still fluent. A year or more before your end of job interview, I guess we should probably stop there now. We'll come back to this tomorrow. If you're curious or want to continue this conversation, I have a couple of hours of office hours. If you're working on the assignments, that too. Yes, as soon as I get back to my office, I'm gonna post these slides and the optional assignment that'll be due next week.